Hello and welcome to a special episode of Georgie's Stripping the Dipping podcast. I'm your co-host, F1 Blag, the formidable F1 Blag, as AMG Dens would call me. AMG Dens is out today. He's training intensively, both for a 24-hour Le Mans race sponsored by Bradley Philpott, but also the Mandem 500. More on that later. But without further ado, we've got a fantastic guest because at Stripping the Dipping, we try and strip back the layers, the superficial layers of motorsport, and look all over industry. So today we're going to talk to a business owner, a guy that owns a classic car bodywork reconstruction firm. So without further ado, from the suburbs of Northampton, perhaps, Mr. Martin Wilcox. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you.
Brilliant. So I kind of butchered that, but you're the owner of Z Lines, is that right? And you restore
Yes,
classic cars?
Yeah, like
Fantastic.
restore, rebuild, refurbish,
Amazing.
which way you look at it. But yeah.
Well, what you won't know if you're listening at home is that this afternoon I got a really detailed list of all the different cars that you've restored, and it's like you've almost got like a checklist of things you're trying to tick off.
Well, they're the ones that I can remember. Not just the ones that I've restored since I've been working for myself, but like for the companies that I've worked for along the way. And I've been very lucky, and you've worked on some very nice cars in the places that I've been.
Fantastic. So if you have ever wondered about restoration of cars, or indeed wanted to know a bit more about getting into restoration or any form of sort of mechanics, then this is the episode for you. So the standard question we tend to ask, Martin, all our listeners is, tell us a bit about yourself. So if you were sort of meeting someone for the first time, how would you describe Martin Wilcox?
Well, I try to be a positive person, but I've been, like I say, restoring cars since we left school, and that's been 30 years we've been doing this. I started with an apprenticeship at a company called Shapecraft in Northampton, and I've worked in 5 different companies before I started working for myself.
Amazing. And like, what's your, because obviously, like, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. You know, who knows? Maybe I'll find out.
Neither
did I. Exactly.
I was
like, when did
accountant.
you? Oh, really? So what made you decide, you know what, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go and restore cars.
Part of the school curriculum that we had to do a work experience. And I knew Shapecraft in Northampton because my brother used to work in the company next door, and you always used to see the nice cars as you went through the door when you went to see my brother. And so their name was in the list of companies that was in the book of places that we could go for the work experiences. So I wrote to them. They accepted me. I done a 2-week work experience, and it got to the end of the second week. And I said, would there be a chance of an apprenticeship? So they said, finish your exams and come back, which is what I did.
Wow. So, if Shapecraft hadn't been on the list, who knows?
Yeah, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have been there. I would have been pushing pens somewhere, being an accountant.
Well, shout out to all of our accountant chums. Hopefully they give us a discount rate on the tax return this year. But look...
you never know, but hopefully this has been a bit more of an interesting life.
Well, look, what first attracted you to cars? Because clearly you noticed Shapecraft because you said your brother was working nearby or next door. Like, what's your first memory of cars or motor racing?
Like I say, when the first thing you can remember, the toys that you played with, the toy cars, when you were growing up, you watched Formula 1 on the television, touring cars. And as you got older, you went to the track to see them. So there's always been cars about, always been interested. It was something that my dad was interested in, so you just sort of followed along.
Brilliant. And now I'm going to ask you to age yourself by telling me about who was driving in Formula 1 when you first set eyes on it.
First started, James Hunt was still racing. Ayrton Senna was just starting, so was Nigel Mansell. So, you were looking at the end of the 70s, early 80s when I started watching it.
Okay, quite a sexy time for Formula 1.
It was a very good time for Formula 1. A little bit better
absolutely.
than it is now, unfortunately, but it's getting better again at the minute, which is nice. The last couple of 3 years has been a bit more exciting.
Yeah. I mean,
made the racing a bit better.
I'm keen to prick your brains about sort of modern Formula One a bit later, but going back to that era, would you say
Yeah.
that you had a favourite driver?
Oh, definitely Ayrton Senna.
Hmm.
Definitely. From when he started, you could tell he was just something special. When he was with Lotus, and then on from there. I say, especially when he was with McLaren, he was. Well, I think he was a lot better than Prost. I know there's going to be Prost fans out there that are jumping up and down, but I just think he was probably the best driver that's ever been. We just robbed of him a little bit too early.
Yeah, that is a shame, isn't it? 90, we've just
Yeah.
passed the anniversary of his
Yeah.
passing and that of Roland Ratzenberger. It is obviously it's a sad, from a human perspective, extremely sad, but also from a sporting perspective to see what might have happened with him and Schumacher.
Yeah, it would have entered in. It'd be nice if Roland Ratzenberger did better as well, because he was really good in the touring car, wasn't he? When he used to race the M3s, didn't he, in the touring car?
Yeah.
And,
So have
he was very good at that.
On those cars, like just a bit of a, because I'm definitely a Formula One guy first. Like road cars, yeah, fine. I get it, but sports cars, fine. But I'm not an expert in that. Dens, my co-host, is. But like I'm a Formula One guy through and through. Like that's me.
Yeah.
What about you? Because you restore sort of classic cars. So
Yeah,
are you more of a sports car guy?
No, they're mainly road cars. What we try
Road
and
cars.
do. Place I've worked before, we have done race cars. I try and steer away from race cars myself, because with you get onto like the classic and historic racing that they do now, the races are every 2 or 3 weeks. They crash it this week, they want it back in 3 weeks. It just messes up any sort of restoration timelines that you've got. So I try and steer away from race cars simply for that reason. They're very nice to look at and you get some lovely cars to do, but it does run a very hectic schedule. Like I say, restoring the road cars is a lot more sedate, shall we say. A lot easier to pencil in.
And so tell us a bit more about Z-Lines, because you've got Z-Lines classic car bodywork restoration. What was your inspiration first behind the name, I guess, and then behind deciding to start up on your own?
The name, I really couldn't decide on a name. So when I used to work at Shakecraft, the boss there, Clive Smart, whenever he'd come and look at a car, especially the Zagatos, and we used to do a fair few DB4 GT Zagatos there, and you get the short wheel, like the Ferrari short wheelbase and the likes. Because of the shape of the rear haunches, like the rear quarter into the door, it creates a Z in the light line. And because the boss was, look at the Z lines on that. So it was sort of a bit of a nod to Clive, and I thought it'd make him smile when I called it, which it did. So, and that's how I got the name.
That sounds like it could be a euphemism, look at the Z lines on that. But
yeah. Yeah. No, Clive,
but no, I like it.
But yeah, I know what you mean.
So this has just popped into my head, and it's probably because you're a better human than I am, or I'm a worse human than you. But look, you've got a Ferrari, or you've got like a really sort of prestigious car that you're restoring. You can't tell me that, you have to, surely you take it for a bit of a test drive. I'm not sure I've restored this fully. I need to go and take it around the block. No?
No, the only cars I've ever been out in are when the owners brought them back. Because usually when they leave us, they're not a running car if it's a customer's car. So cars we do ourselves, we take them all the way through to a finish. But if it's a customer's car, I don't do the mechanicals as a business side at the moment. So it will go elsewhere to be mechanically rebuilt.
Fascinating. And so you're doing the body work?
Yeah, we do the body work, the chassis work, the woodwork, the trim. So,
the trim?
You cover, the interior trimming, the leather work, the carpets, the headlinings, and all that sort of stuff.
Fantastic. And where do you get the materials for the trim? Because I suppose some of these classic cars are like really old school, that leather, classic leather and things like that. Is it just normally available? Do you have to go and find other cars that, had that, or where do you get it from?
No, there's we use a leather wholesalers in Rushden, and they are very, very good. Like saying, it is right on our doorstep. But there are several leather wholesalers around the country, but these just happen to be a very good one, and they're only 20 minutes away, which is nice and handy.
Yeah. So I'm not going to say who dented my car. I had a BMW a while back, which Denz will hate me for because he's more of a Mercedes. I was looking for a house. I may have been behind the wheel, and I just sort of dented the side, the door panel, trying to
Yeah.
take trying to reverse out. And then, we could have sent it to the BMW dealer. In fact, the terms of the lease might have suggested that I do that. But we didn't. We sent it to someone down in the country somewhere, and it came back. It looked good as new. So with a dent or a kind of a huge dip, what techniques are you using to kind of bring that flush to where it should be?
Usually you have to shrink the metal back somehow if it's a really deep gouge. So I'd say on the newer cars, tend not to do newer cars because the metals are harder, metals are thinner. Most of what we do is, whereas your BMW, the material is probably 0.8 of a mil thick. Most of the jobs that we do, the skin panels on them, if they're steel, are 1 mil thick, which doesn't sound a lot of difference, but that extra 0.2 of a mil makes an awful lot of difference when it comes to rework. So you can hotspot them, and there's 2 ways you can do that. You can either do it with an oxyacetylene torch, and you make a nice little cherry round, sort of better size of a 5p, and work it back with a mallet and weight, or you can use a spot welder, like a single-sided spot welder, which is what I'd use for that sort of thing. Copper weight, a copper block on the back, single-sided spot weld on the front, and it'll shrink your panel back.
Wow. So you heat it up, basically.
Yes. Like I say, you do get the
Okay.
people like Dent Doctor and all that, and they'll come out with the little prongs and pokes, and they can get like the little creases and the little bits out. But if you put a deep gouge in, then you've stretched the metal, and you've got to shrink the metal back to get it back to its original shape.
No, that makes sense. And the thing I noticed when I got my car back was if I knew what I was looking for, or I looked at it at a particular angle, I could be like, yeah, I can just about see where that was. So like when you're restoring something, it might have like
Yeah.
an imperfection in it. What are you doing with your eyes? What angle are you looking at the car to make sure that it's flush and it's back to how it should be?
When we're, like I say, if you're either shaping or repairing a panel, because like I say, most of the panels that we made, they're made from hand. The sheets of aluminium or steel will come in. You're using an English wheel, and I've got Eckhold shrinkers and stretchers. So you can only do 2 things to metal. You can either shrink it or stretch it, and that's how you put the shape in. And as you put the shape in, the panel forms a line. Like when you're looking down the side of your car, you can see the reflections, can't you, as to what's behind it. If you put, when we use fluorescent tubes, so you use vertical fluorescent tubes that you put at the back of the vehicle or the front of the vehicle, depending on which end you're looking at it. So if you're at the front, you put the lights at the back, and it'll give you a straight line to work to. Yeah. So if you've got a nice even line on the curve, then you can see you've got a nice shape. But if you've got any divots in it, you'll have a little kick, a little flick in the line. Will show you where you've got to either put more shape in or less shape in to give you your straight line or your even shape.
I mean, my question to you, because I'm naturally probably not great with my hands. I can play the piano, but I can't I could do it at the allotment. I could probably do a raised bed by hammering or screwing a bit of wood together. But the finesse that you must have when you're looking at the light reflecting back, looking at that straight line, surely you didn't just come out of school and be like, yeah, okay, that's easy.
No,
has it taken years to perfect?
The apprenticeship's usually 4 to 5 years, and then you spend about another 5-6 years on top of that getting experience. So it's a good sort of 10-12 years before you can think, you're pretty much confident on what you're doing. Because every job's a little bit different. Yeah, and none of the cars you get to work on are cheap. So there's a lot of responsibility. Well, yeah, it's a lot of responsibility in what you're doing because some of the cars are old. And there's a lot of history with some of them, especially the racing cars. And it's then put in your hands to repair it and put it back to right. So there's an awful lot of responsibility on some cars.
No, I can imagine. And so talking about those cars that have come in, what's perhaps your favorite car to have ever worked on? And then maybe it's the same answer, maybe it isn't. But what's the proudest you have been of a job that you've worked on a car?
Favourite car, I go for Lister Nobly, just because I like the Lister Nobly. It's a fantastic shape car. And always fancied doing a hard top. They never done it. It was an open top. So it's like a D-type special. Frank Costin redesigned it slightly and basically made it a lower, sleeker shape. But the proudest we've ever been was probably a DB4 GT Zagato replica that we done for a Belgian fella named Noel de Block. That was when I was at Shapecraft. Me and a bloke called Steve Matthewman done that, and that job is probably the best job that you've done. Well, and you've done some fantastic cars through the years, but that is probably the best looking car that we've done. Everything just seemed to just look just right on it. Yeah, you couldn't pick fault.
And I'm looking at the Lister Nobly to begin with, and I just encourage you, if you're listening at home, just Google that. That's a beautiful car, and you're right about it being low. Yeah. Stunning.
I say I always fancied doing a hard top version. They never done one with a roof. So because it's got such a raised back on it, it makes it, you thought it'd be a perfect car for a coupe.
Yeah, it looks stunning. And like, because this raises a question, because you said, I think, is it a guy from like the continent you're working on that second car for, like from?
Yeah.
Like how do you get your name out there? Are you really good at social media, or is it like, no, word of mouth? This guy heard of you and was like, I had to come and see you.
Bit of both. Since I've been working for myself, most of the advertising's been done through social media. I haven't placed an advert anywhere, but it's like the DB6 I've got at the minute in the workshop come from Australia. Well, it's owned by an English person, but it was the Australian person that sold it that got me to do the job. And then he sold it to an English person once it was here. I'm saying that was from Instagram.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your shout out your Insta? I'm intrigued now. What's your Instagram?
It's Z-Lines. Z_lines. Yeah.
Wow.
We're on that and on Facebook. I say there's a couple of thousand followers on Facebook and just over 1,000 followers on Instagram. I haven't put a post on for a couple of months, but I say the last post on Facebook got 30,000 views, and it's amazing the response you can get from 10 pictures that you put on.
Wow. Yeah, so I can see you've got your last post at time of recording. It looks like you've got like a shot of the workshop and just the chassis of the bare chassis of the car. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, the DB6 underbody. And that's the one from Australia. That come in as a front end, so it's a front cross member and 2 front chassis legs. All the rest of it was up to the bulkhead was there, but it was rotten. And the rest of it, excuse me, the rest of it's been built from it.
And then how long would it take you? Because I really encourage you, if you're listening at home, just go on Facebook. For those of you that still have Facebook, I know the kids out there sort of get ashamed of it, but like
I'm showing my age.
This car just looks like, in some of the pictures, just some like metal work, very little skin on it. And like from that point to finishing it, how long is that? That's got to be a year or something, surely. How long are you working on that?
For me to build, and what you're seeing there is the Super Leggera structure. For me to make that and put the aluminium bodywork on it, you're around 2,000 hours. So you're looking at a year's work. And then by the time it goes through the trim shop, the paint shop, the mechanicals, the electricals, to do a full restoration, it's probably going to be 3 years if everything doesn't have any holdups.
Yeah.
And it is not a quick process.
No. Well, to do it right, no.
Everything's got to be done in the right order. And I say, if you start rushing things and cutting corners, you don't get the job at the end of it.
No. Well, here's my question to you. I don't know if you've watched the Only Fools and Horses, where I might have said this before. Trigger gets an award. Yeah, Trigger's broom. Yeah, exactly. So those of you that are listening that are probably below the age of 35 or not from the UK, there's a sitcom.
Know what we're on.
Yeah, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? There's a guy that is like classic for being a little bit slow-witted, and he was getting an award from the council for using the same broom for 30 years as a street cleaner. And he was like, the punchline is it's had 6 different heads and 7 different handles. So extending that to this, restoring a car, is there a premium on using original parts, or Are you just trying to create the aesthetic of what and
Yes.
the sort of shape? Yeah.
Yeah, you always try and use as much of the original car as possible. And like I say, with this particular DB6, there's a front cross member and 2 front chassis legs left, and that was it. The rest of it had just rotted into nothing. But you always try and use as much as you can. But there are a lot of cars out there that are completely new, or they might be a few years old now, but when they first see the light of day with a fresh paint job, everything about them's new, and they're still sold as original cars.
Broom.
So
again,
it does happen. Yeah, it does happen. Like I say, you'll get an old chassis number stamped on a new chassis, and away you go. But people don't want that anymore. They want the traceability. It's what separates like an original car from a recreation, because there's so many like continuation cars, shall we call them, that are made by the manufacturers, but they're not an original car. They are a 2020 car, they're a 2018 car, whatever, but it's a continuation car, not an original car. And a lot of people still want the originals.
I'm sure they do. Yeah. Is there paperwork that comes along in terms of that traceability or that authenticity? Is there any sort of paperwork that cars tend to have with them, or not really?
Yeah, and you'll get service histories, you'll get obviously your MOTs and the likes thereof. You can trace it depending on what country it's been in through registration documents and when it's changed hands from different owner to different owner. And then you always come back to the stamps that are on the car. So you got the chassis number and the engine number and all that sort of stuff that's still stamped sort of throughout the vehicles. And like the Aston Martin, they have the chassis number that's stamped on the front cross member, and then they have a build number, and that build number will be stamped on the body, it'll be stamped on the doors, the bonnet, the boot, everything that comes off of it, all the trim will be stamped with that number. And it makes a difference if you've got then a car with matching numbers all the way through. And it's the same with most marques. If you see a car that's advertised with matching numbers, that's the one that's got, like the engine gearbox has got the same number as what it had originally. So you have the chassis number, the body number, and the mechanical numbers will match.
That makes sense.
So so it is an easy way to trace through it. It's always more difficult if it's changed countries, which a lot of them do. But like I say, it just takes a little bit more time to find the history. But it is well documented. You can easily trace, even if it's been in a barn for 20 years, somebody knows where it's been. And it's amazing the things that do appear, and somebody will know where it's been. There's still a paper trail of how it got there and how it's left.
No, I guess so. And here's my question to you, because we're basically talking about cars that were designed pre 1980, pre 1970. I'm trying to what's the cutoff if we talk classic? We say the word classic.
Classics usually at the minute they sort of make to the 80s. But most of the stuff that we get involved with, it will finish in the 60s. And because the panels that we make, they're handmade. So you'll have a jig or a buck, whether it be fiberglass or wood or any particular resin. And like I said, they're shaped by hand to fit on that buck, and then they're put together. You get cars that are into the 70s onwards, they're pressed. They were pressed panels that are then spot welded, whichever together. Anything that's designed to be pressed is always more difficult to make than something that's been designed to be made by hand. So you can do it, but the costs rise. And being as the costs are usually in the older vehicles, that's why that's usually what we end up restoring.
No, that makes sense.
So if it takes, as a rough rule of thumb, if you've got an open top car, you're looking at about 1,000, 1,200 hours. If you've got a fixed head car, you're looking at 2,000 hours. So to do that fixed head car, you're looking at 120,000, 130,000 pounds upwards. So you've got to have a big value in the car to make it worthwhile doing. Because once it leaves me with the 120,000 plus bill, it will then go to the paint shop where it'll have another 20,000. It will go to the trim shop where it'll have another 20,000. Then it will go to the mechanic shop where it can have another 60, 70,000 spent on it. So by the time you get to the end of it, you're £250,000 into a car. You've got to have an awful lot of value in the car to make it worthwhile at the end of it, or great passion for it.
You've made me feel extremely poor.
Don't worry, I can't afford none of the cars I work on, so I won't worry about it. But no, you do get cars that people make just for the passion. Well, we done one for a bloke called Tom Solly a few years ago. It was a Rover 20, and the car's worth 15 grand, 20 grand maybe. But he must have spent 150, 160,000 pounds on this. And he was an old gentleman. When he had one, when he was convalescing here in the war, American fella, he got shot in the war, come back here to convalesce, and had a Rover 20 drophead. And he wanted another one before he died. He was lucky, he had a few, he wasn't a poor fella. So he spent an awful lot of money getting this one done, exactly how he wanted it. So you do get to, work on obscure things, but usually, like I say, you're down to the Aston Martins, the Ferraris, the Maseratis, the likes thereof, that do have a large price tag that go with them. Because a lot of people want to see some sort of return for the money.
So and then people tend to trade those cars once they've been, or sell them on, or what is the kind of attraction, or is it just they want to collect them?
A lot of people are collectors. When, like you say, you do get to do some cars for people that intend to use them. But the racing cars, they do get raced at the events like Goodwood, Silverstone Classic, and the likes thereof. But a lot of the road cars, they'll be done and they come out to.
So on the road cars, like, I'm just thinking of other cars I've owned in my life. I'm not going to say them on the line because some of them are frankly embarrassing. Some of them are French make of the mid-90s. So here's my question: like, what went wrong in my view, or what happened to car design that, when you look back, I don't know, it just looks, anything pre-1970 to me looks stunning, and then most things between about 1970 and, I don't know, 2015 look blocky and, I don't know, a bit hideous. Was it this? It was cheaper to mass produce a kind of blockier design, or what happened with car design?
And a lot of it's down to fashion, and you get styles of what people like in the era, but a lot of it's down to like wind tunnels and like the design to keep it sleek, to keep it smooth, to get your efficiencies up. Then you come down to production methods. A lot of panels now are bonded on rather than welded on. So your panels are joined together different, which means that the shape of your car is going to be different. Like everything used to have a drain gutter, didn't it, round the roof, where the roof was spot welded to the side structures. That will finish with the Ford Sierra, that anybody will remember that one, because the technology behind joining the panels together changed. So as the technology changes, the way that you make the car changes, so the shape of it can then go to a different way. Look at bumpers now, and a bumper will make up pretty much the whole of the front or the whole of the rear of a car, because it's injection molded out of ABS. They can just bolt on. Whereas 40 years ago, you couldn't do that.
You get a picture of a Ford Sierra.
Yeah. Not a Cosmos,
I love it.
They don't count. They were nice.
Yeah, well, no, what was that one? There was like a massive one, like a Ford Sierra Scorpio or something in it.
They done the RS Cosworth. That was the one that was the very popular one. Like I say, that again, they were sort of 4 or 5 years old, and the insurance was more than what it was to buy one, because they were very stealable.
Gosh,
but
it's like very 80s.
Oh yeah, very, very 80s. I say it was 83, was it 84? They come out, but it doesn't matter what point in history you pick on car design. Cars always look very similar, simply because that's what the fashion dictates. But the way that cars look today has gone through like production processes. It's like you look at a Tesla now, and they are very jelly mold because they don't need the air intake at the front. They basically superform the chassis. It's like an injection molded aluminium chassis in it that they use. So it's all sort of made in 3 bits, bolted together, panels glued on, and away you go. It's very, very kit form, and how cars are made now.
If someone drove in with a Tesla, right, you'd be like, no, I can't deal with that here. or could you
No, I
have
couldn't.
a crack at it?
No, I wouldn't. I'd just send them down the road. Like I say anything that gets much into the 70s, like I say, I don't really do that much past it, simply because it's not going to be worth it for the owner. You got to think of what the car's worth and what they get at the end of it. There are always the exceptions to the rule, but like you get the average classic, and it's why they've become rare, because they're not worth restoring. And you get up until sort of into the 90s when they started galvanising, galvanised dip in the body shells. There's an awful lot that falls to bits before that. When it's like you were saying about your French car that was made in the 90s, I dare say it's still here. But if you'd have bought that Ford Sierra, it wouldn't be, because they weren't galvanised.
I think my Mark II Clio is, or Mark I maybe, I don't know, is probably a small cube of metal that's been squashed somewhere in the West Midlands.
Very
depending
probably
on
a washing machine by now, isn't
it? Yeah, yeah, it's been recycled, sadly, but
Yeah.
we'll maybe one day I'll try and get one of those Williams Renault Clios that they had. Those were a bit of a dream.
They were very nice, weren't they?
Yeah. Now we're reminiscing about UK spec hot hatches, which will alienate most of our listeners.
It was a good era. It was a very good era for cars.
I think it was a good era. Yeah.
Go 5 GT turbo.
There we go. Exactly, with a little spoiler on the back.
Yep.
Going to classic cars, right? Because you talked about fashions. What's your favorite classic car? Probably one that you've talked about your favorite that you've worked on. Maybe one that you haven't worked on.
One that I'd like to work on that I haven't.
Yeah,
Lamborghini
exactly.
Miura.
Ooh,
definitely a Lamborghini Miura. Yeah.
Yeah.
I say they were a
do you have a chance of working on that?
There's always the chance, but like I say, I've been doing it 30 years, so I'm now 50. You got 15, 16 years left of doing this maybe, and I ain't even come near one yet. But you never know. You never know. But they are an awesome looking car. First rear engine sports car. And all because the bloke that owned a tractor company wanted one engine in the back of a car, and Enzo Ferrari wouldn't do it. So he made his own.
That is a legendary story.
Yeah, that's how Lamborghini started making cars. Just because Enzo Ferrari wouldn't put an engine in the back.
Yeah, and eventually I guess he ate his words, since, that's where we are today.
Oh, yeah.
Or mid-engine at least. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, the Lamborghini Miura, that's definitely the one that I'd like to work on. One that I wouldn't mind owning either, but no chance of that.
So, Lamborghini Miura, according to my good friend Mr. Wikipedia, only 764 were built, right? So maybe if you move to Italy, I don't know, you could relocate to somewhere in exactly.
You never know.
Gosh.
But no, they are a nice car. They do, like I say, they're made of steel, so they do rot. So there's always a good chance.
And what about other
person at some point?
So you've got our listeners frantically going, Googling beautiful cars. What is there another one that sort of comes to mind that you'd love to work on?
That I haven't, or that I would.
Yeah, well, it can be that you have, but whichever. Yeah.
Cars that you have worked on that I did like the Spiker, like the C8 Laviolette. That was a lovely looking car. That was a nice one to work on. I say for a new car at the time, that was 2000 and 2002, was it? Somewhere around there. Ooh. And I say that was a lovely looking car.
That does look pretty.
Yeah, I say the interior in them was gorgeous. But other cars I like to work on, an E-Type. I'd like to do a low drag E-Type at some point, and that is one that might be on the cards. So that's something that'd be nice to do in the next couple of 3 years, and it's something that's looking quite promising at the minute.
Ooh, well, fingers crossed for you.
And I say a lot depends on time. I know I stand a good chance of doing it because I bought the E-Type 4 months ago to do it with. So it's just having a bit of time to do it.
So that would be a personal project, would it?
Yeah, that would be a personal project. So when you get a bit of time to do it, that's always the difficult bit. When you're trying a lot of bit of time, and then another job comes up, and another job comes up, and customers have to come first at the minute.
How many cars do you think you work on concurrently? Yeah.
What, currently in the
How mu-
workshop and in progress?
or just at the same time? What's the maximum? Because we've probably got many billionaires here listening that are thinking this is the guy that's going to restore my car. So how many do you think you can fit or work on at the same time?
I only usually work on 2, maybe 3 at a time. When, like I say, it keeps the number small. It keeps things reasonably simple to organise. And if anything comes to a stop, you can always move on. People can be swapped about, moved about. But if you get too much, it just gets too complicated. It's easier to have, get a car done quicker and out and get the next one in than what it is have lots of projects in that just drag on forever. Customers prefer it as well. It keeps everything moving. Like I say, you try and do things in sort of a 3-year span. If you get any hold-ups, that can soon escalate. So if you can get a job done quicker or out of my shop quicker into the next part, then all the better it is for the owner.
Gosh, that is an attitude that I wish the kind of people that I try and contract in my area had. But I'm trying to get my garden done, and they've said it was like last summer, and we're at this summer now at this point. So yeah, I think you're right. Like not having too much of a backlog is probably the best way to manage customers. Although you don't want to dry up.
I've still got a couple. I've got a couple of years of work sitting on the books waiting to come through. So there's plenty to come into. But like I say, you don't want to keep things. You want to get things through the pipeline as quick as you can.
No, yeah, of course.
It's better for everybody.
So you talked a bit about sort of trying to steer clear of racing cars these days, given their drivers tend to prang them a bit. I'm actually going to the Goodwood Festival of Speed this year. Have you? I take it you've been,
It's
or to
nice.
Goodwood
I've
in
never
general.
been.
Oh,
I've never been. I've been to
the classic.
No, I've been to the Festival of Speed twice, but I've never been to the Revival. I've been to a couple of times, but I've never been to Revival. Usually go to Silverstone Classic because it's just down the road. It's a nice, easy day out, and it's pretty much the same event. But like I say, the atmosphere at Goodwood is meant to be good. We're intend to go with another E-Type that we're doing. Sort of won't be next year, but probably the year after. Figure it's a good point to market it and sell it, and with a bit of luck, get a bit of interest in the lightweight that we're doing as well, in the low drag.
Yeah, I can imagine that will get you a lot of interest. I mean, you could trick someone into buying it that crashes a lot, and then you've got hire a few more people. You've got some business.
Yeah, you got a continual work stream, then, haven't you?
Exactly. Here's a question. Actually, it relates to racing, and you sort of implied earlier that you do watch a bit of Formula One these days as well.
Yeah.
My view is that, right, because of this huge strides in safety and technology, driving standards have kind of dropped because, if you have a prang in a Formula One car, unless it goes extremely wrong, you're going to just get out and walk off. And
they do expect to
take
walk
that for
away
granted
these days.
Yeah.
I say, if you'd have gone back even 15, 20 years, some of the cars that they have today, you wouldn't get away from.
No.
And the carbon fibre technology has come on phenomenally to make the car stronger.
Exactly.
But then again, so like the halo that comes around the head, I say, giving the driver a bit of protection from anything sort of coming in as an impact, whether it be a wheel or another car or whichever. I said the safety, you can see why you got to put the safety in, and nobody wants to see anybody get hurt. But yeah, it does make people complacent. So it's the same with the runoffs. And you got an awful lot of runoff on corners now. What's wrong with the gravel trap? If you make a mistake, you're in the gravel trap, you don't get out. Whereas as it is, you go around the runoff area and you're back in the race again.
And sometimes it's faster. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I said, there's good things, obviously. Nobody likes to see anybody getting hurt. But I don't think it's done an awful lot for the racing. It's the same as the electrical systems in the car. It makes them that heavy. And they're huge now, aren't they, compared to what they were 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And Alonso summed it up the best. A couple of 3 years ago, he was in one of the press conferences, and he says he thinks he's the only person, when there were sort of 6 or 7 drivers there, and he said that he was the only driver there that would probably still remember when the lights go out, racing until the flag waves at the end of it. He says, now you're saving your tyres, you're saving your fuel, you're saving your battery. Everything's about economising, not about racing. making everything last to the end. You got to do however many races it is now on an engine. They get 2 powertrains, don't they, now to last 23 races?
That's crazy. Races? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Whereas, you go back into the 80s and they could have 4 or 5 engines in a weekend.
Yeah, the Brabham qualifying engine, which was like a BMW or was it Alfa Romeo? I can't remember, but it was sort of
BMW,
high turbo.
It was a stupidly overpowered. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Formula One has changed an awful lot. And the size of the teams now. When, you go back into the end of the 70s into the 80s, it's like McLaren probably had 2,000 people working for them, tops. And now you look at it, the aerodynamic department's probably that size. So it's changed from a sport to a business, hasn't it, as well? Which has done it some favours, not others.
For sure. And who would you say your favourite driver is in this current modern era?
Current era?
Yeah, like still driving or has been driving up until the last couple of years?
Yeah, up to the last couple of years, I go for Vettel. He was a very good driver. I say he got better as he got older. Same as Alonso now. When he gets better as he gets older. He doesn't seem to throw his toys out the pram quite as often as he used to and blame everybody else when something goes wrong. And let's say you got to, if you make a mistake, you got to hold your hands up. That was me. I didn't, you didn't get the most out of the car that day. You didn't get the most out of the car that weekend, whichever. So, but no, there are some good up and coming drivers. And hopefully, like I say, they'll carry the sport on into the future. It's nice to see Russell doing well. And he seems to be getting on remarkably well at Mercedes. So, is Lando Norris hopefully going to be another great driver of the future? So, there's still a lot of up-and-coming talent in the sport.
Yeah, and there was a moment in the when was it? Damon Hill would have retired in 1999. And then I think Jenson Button appeared. And so there was quite a period when there was like one British... Oh, well, Coulthard was there. But yeah, there was like a couple of seasons when there was like one British driver. And now we seem to have quite a good range, actually.
Yeah, like I say, but there's a nice range of nationalities all the way across there, though, isn't there? And like you say, it used to be a few British, few French, a couple of Germans, and that was about it. Anybody else that come along didn't really do very well. But now there seems to be a lot more opportunity coming, simply because it is more of a multinational sport now. When it used to be very European, even though that you race around the world, everything was a very European focus on it. Whereas now it does seem to be taking a lot, the rest of the world into consideration a lot more.
Absolutely.
And it makes it a world championship. It's meant to be a world championship. When you go to America and you look at World Series baseball, there's only those in Japan that play it. And it's not really much of a World Series then, is it? So, to be a world champion, you've got to include the world, whether it be, racing, drivers, the lot. The circuits where you go, the countries that you go to. Make it as inclusive as possible.
For sure. I wonder, though, there's probably a maths here because clearly we want it to be inclusive, but I can't see how they're going to do more than there are 23 races on the calendar this season and then China dropped out, so it went to 22. Are they going to have to do fewer European races or something? Like, how are they going to manage that to get that inclusion?
Don't know. This is going to be the difficult bit, isn't it? Do you go back? I don't know when you started watching the racing, but you went back. You used to have 16 races a year, but you only used to use sort of your top 11 or 12 finishes. You didn't. Not every point counted. If you had 3 or 4 bad races, you wouldn't count those towards your championship points. So do you do the same sort of thing where you could have 26, 27 races, but you wouldn't have every driver at every race?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think so the drivers is one thing, but I kind of feel for the mechanics and the kind of the trackside team that are traveling. I think what we got, so this weekend, Imola could be rained out, but then I think it's the start of a triple header, which includes Monaco and another circuit. And the logistics of sort of turning up on a Wednesday and then a Thursday, getting the car out and then by the Sunday night they're mainly packed up, drive off on the Monday and start again. It just seems,
and you're doing that from March through to November.
Yeah,
it gets a long year. It gets a very long year. So,
It
which
was
is where if you
something to
didn't
do.
have to race every race, you might pick where you're going, which track suits your car strong points. Although it's going to be a bit disappointing for the fans because they're not going to see them at every race. But it might make cars strong. Your racing might be better, even if your favourite driver's not there.
Yeah. Well, so you've mentioned Vettel as probably your favourite modern era driver, or from recent years. You talked about Senna before. Have you got a team that you tend to follow or prefer?
Always like McLaren. Like I say, obviously you grew up with Senna, and I know he was Lotus for the start, but he was always more successful with the McLarens. You always followed him with that, and it's always nice to see him doing well. Unfortunately, not so well at the minute. It'll be nice to see him back on top again at some point.
Yeah,
but
it's interesting.
McLaren's definitely I'd say one of the favourites. Definitely.
They've sort of dropped off because they were, dominant in the late 80s.
Yeah.
Williams had their period on top, then McLaren sort of came back before Ferrari then had their dominance. But then McLaren sort of always been there or thereabouts, and
they've
the turbo hybrid era
teams.
destroyed them. Yeah, but then they were coming back, weren't they? Yeah, with sort of Norris was doing really well, and then this year they just seem
backpedaled again.
Yeah,
it shows how good the competition is. When you've only got to have a slightly poor design. Look at Mercedes. And how many years were they head and shoulders above everybody? And now they've had 2 years in the doldrums for them. I know they've been finishing sort of third, fourth, but it's not a good finish for them, is it? And I know it shows how good they've been when they can say they've had a bad year and still finish sort of third in the Constructors' Championship. But you only have to drop the ball a little bit, and it takes you 4 or 5 seasons to catch back up again.
Yeah, and to me, I don't know what you think. So just like talking about Red Bull at the moment, it just feels to me like they're gonna be on top until the regulations change. They feel like they've got something in hand.
Probably.
And they might not be pushing. Yeah.
Yeah, very probably. But that's what Mercedes were last time. And on that particular set of rules, they dominated. And it wasn't until you changed the rules that somebody else got on top. And like I say, the cars are so technical. Everything is so fine, like the levels that they perform to. If one of those levels isn't at 100%, if you're down to 98%, it makes such a difference on the overall characteristics of the car. Like I say, it's whether you can get back over it or not because of budget caps and times that you get for testing's limited. Unless you hit the ground running, it is a big struggle.
No, for sure. And we'll see, it remains to be seen. Maybe the cost cap penalty on, that's limiting the aero testing for Red Bull will achieve something and
maybe make a difference.
Yeah, maybe. We don't know. And we'll see. We'll see who breaks the cost cap or is found to break the cost cap this year, Who
Somebody
knows
will.
It could be.
They always push the rules as much as they can, but that's what you have to do at that sort of level. If you operate well inside the rules, you're not going to win. It's the same as everything, whether it's in the development, in the office, in the design, or on the track. You've got to be at 100, 203%. And if you're not pushing the boundaries, you're not pushing the rules as much as you can, then you're not going to win.
No, my favourite, I think, is the Tyrrell from something like 1984, which is when Martin Brundle sort of turned up. They would fill the car with water towards the end of the race to make sure it met the minimum weight test at the end. Is it? I guess technically it didn't break the rules, but clearly there were politics at play, and the spirit of the rules perhaps it didn't quite follow, so they were DQ'd.
It's part of what racing is. It's finding what rules you can bend as much as you can without breaking them, and until they change the rules, you're not breaking it. I say probably not in the spirit of racing, but everybody does it. If you're not doing it, you're not at the. You're not going to be at the front. So, but it's always nice to see. It puts a bit of smile on the face when you look back at those sort of rules. How rules get broken or bent, should we say?
So hard segue. Speaking of bends, do you have any Do you have any favourite circuits? You talked about sort of looking at expanding the World Championship to make it truly global. Have you got a particular track? I know you live 10 miles away from, or 10 minutes away, sorry, from Silverstone.
Yeah,
Would
Silverstone's
that
always
be
going
up
to
there?
be a
Or?
favourite just because it's
Yeah.
right on your doorstep.
Yeah.
But Hockenheim's always a nice one to sit and watch and race round. Spa's
Yeah.
always nice to
The
sit and
modern
watch
one?
and race round. The
Yeah.
modern racetracks,
Yeah.
I don't know, Sochi maybe. It's a nice, it's a changeable track in it. It's got a, they've done well with the design on it. It's got some classic parts to it. It's got some newer parts to it. But there's, you know, and there's a lot of new tracks come on that are, they've got to grow on you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the older tracks, they've got prestige because of how long they've been used. Yeah. It doesn't matter what track you get, when guaranteed they're not going to race exactly the same track for the first 2 or 3 years because they're going to think, oh, I can improve that a little bit. I can improve that a little bit. So once it's been through sort of 5 or 6 seasons, then you start getting into a truly good track. So I can remember when Suzuka come on and everybody moaned at that. Now it was one of the better tracks that they race on. So, you know, tracks take a little while to develop. I don't think any of them stay 100% the same. They change the corner a little bit. You know, it's just out of changing the curb height a little bit, or like we were saying before about the gravel traps and the runoffs. They'll put a gravel trap here, a runoff there, and it just makes it that more entertaining.
What's intriguing to me, and you mentioned it earlier, because I think the cars in maybe like 1994, the cars were as low as sort of 500 kilos, something like that.
Yeah.
And now they're up at the 800. Like,
yeah.
the characteristics of tracks change when you have a different size of car. So like the larger the car, yeah.
When we'll take Silverstone example just because it's here, so, you know, it's one that I know well. But you look at the shape of what the track is now, especially if you go to a classic car race, and the cars are flat out for 90% of the track, which suits the modern cars. You know, they're built for that sort of racing. Whereas the older cars, you'll get some that were good at this, you know, for straight out speed, some that were better around the corners, and you always got the more sort of defined tracks. You know, you'd have cars that were better in certain areas on certain tracks, which now the tracks all seem to be very similar, if that makes sense. You know, and they all seem to have a couple of 3 speed straights and a couple of 3 twisty bits, and there doesn't seem to be that much definition. You know, and obviously they're doing it, you know, to keep the racing as close as possible. But then the cars all look pretty much the same.
And the challenge you've got, I suppose, in modern Formula One is the size of the cars means that you're not going to get 3-wide racing or difficult to follow, or, you know, the amount of weight you're trying to decelerate means that the braking zones the modern brakes being so good, it just makes it difficult to kind of see that overtaking that you'd perhaps want to see.
Yeah, but it's like the modern racing line's different to what it was, you know, 15, 20 years ago. Like I say, because the acceleration lines are great now and the aerodynamics are great. They brake as late as they can into a corner, take as sharp a line as possible and accelerate out the other side. Whereas if you'd have gone back 25 years, you carried the speed through the corner. Because the technology and the acceleration of the cars is different, you drive the car different. Which again, with the modern tracks, they design the tracks different to suit the modern cars.
You've almost convinced me to get a VPN and buy or get the F1 TV app and go back and look at some classic races. But we'll have to make. Go on, sorry.
Yes, I would always say I'd watch a few of the older races. Like I say, you see them, even if you look just through YouTube, you will find the older races. Sit and have a watch, because it is a totally different experience to what you'll get watching the modern Formula One.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just for Murray Walker's commentary.
I was literally going to say, just when you hear Murray Walker, you hear the old F1 theme, the jingle, and then off we go.
Like I say, it is a totally different experience. Especially if you get with James on as well. They used to bounce off each other quite well.
Yes, with one microphone, I'm told. So there was a bit of a wrestle over who was speaking,
Yeah, half the time, apparently, James just used to take the microphone off of Murray just to wind him up.
Exactly. Well, look, it's been a fascinating conversation. Really fantastic to hear basically how you restore classic cars and and you've given us some Google sort of tips. We're going to go and look up some of those cars. I've got the Miura now, probably as my phone background forever. So I do hope that a wealthy car collector knocks on your door and says, "Oh, I'd really love you to restore this in the not too distant future." So I hope
if they do, I'll
really
let you know.
crossed for you.
But let's say
Yeah, please do.
Anybody that's interested in car restoration, when there's a lot of stuff on YouTube you can see on how projects are done. Ray Shalene, Pro Shaper, he is a very good person to watch, American person. I say the programs like that. Jay Leno's always a good one. And there's a lot of programs about you can find how things are done. Even if you want to take it to your own project, your own cars, whether you're making like a kit car or restoring a classic, it's all the same principles.
Gosh, well, if I had a garage, I'd almost certainly buy that Renault Clio, and then I'd almost certainly dent it, which means I'd have to fix it. But it's been really fascinating. Any before you leave us, anything? And I'm going to ask you the critical question in a minute. But anything you want to point our listeners towards? Anything you want to shout out, or any message you want to leave our listeners?
Well, let's say with car restoration, if anybody's listening because they want it, it's not a bad time to get into the industry. There's a lot of opportunities, a lot more opportunities now than what there was when I left school. And I'd say I was lucky, 100% lucky where I got. But now there's a lot of courses. Heritage Skills Academy, they do a lot of training, whether it be mechanical restoration, bodywork, paintwork. There's a lot of places now that are opening up. So it is a lot more accessible to anybody that wants to get in.
Fantastic. Well, I do hope that any budding, restorers, people that want to work on cars, take heed, and they look at those opportunities. But before we go, right, there's a fundamental question we ask all our guests. We've asked, I always say this person, we've asked Mario Andretti. He had a very strong view. We've asked who else have we asked? Like lots of we've asked Brian Herter of IndyCar fame, who I love IndyCar, but we haven't covered it today.
Yeah.
And he was more relaxed. So the question is, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Definitely, most definitely. Whenever I have a pizza, 90% of the time it'll be Hawaiian. I do like it.
Wow.
Does give it a nice. It adds a bit of sweetness to it. The tomato can often be just that little bit too sharp. You get a bit of pineapple on it, that little bit of sweetness takes it all away. Especially with
you need to get into advertising. Wow, that's fantastic.
A nice smoked ham on it as well goes lovely.
Fantastic. Well, look, if you're going to franchise some sort of pizza business, I'm happy to work for it. That sounds lovely. I'm hungry now. I've had my dinner. Brilliant. Well, Georgie's going to be happy because Georgie is the pineapple team and I'm the non-pineapple team. So while I'm left disappointed, you've made her day. So congrats.
Which way did Mario jump?
He said no. He was very Italian about it. It was like no. Like it was like there was no. I know. Sorry, I didn't want to lead the witness, so I didn't tell you.
No, I thought it'd have been a yes. Like you say, I thought being Italian passionate, it'd have been a yes, but never mind.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, well, we'll. What we might do is create a tally chart of our guests. I think pineapple's quite popular. We do have some fence sitters that say, "Oh, not for me," but I wouldn't deny anyone their right to pineapple. But I like you. You kind of were very direct. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you got to jump down one side or the other. You can't sit on the fence over something as important as that.
No splinters in the bum. You're off the fence. Exactly.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Well, look, Martin, thank you so much for joining us. Really,
thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Well, we'll have to. No, thank you. We'll have to have you on again. But also, I encourage people to go and check out your Instagram and your Facebook, which is Z_lines. And you can see just from, it looks like it's from scratch, or someone's brought you like a little tiny bit of a car and you're building something out of it. So
a lot of cars that we have built over the years have been from scratch, and they have been from nothing.
Wow.
It's nice when you get a project like that sometimes, because everybody thinks, it's such a daunting job going, building a car, but it's not a big job. It's just lots of little jobs that you put together in the right order.
Gosh, that almost sounds like philosophy. Very good. Brilliant. Well, that wraps up today's show. Please do, wherever you're listening to us on your platform of choice for podcasts, please give us a 5-star rating or a favourable review, or just comment and tell us what you like to hear about, or ask us any questions. You can listen to us on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice, as I've said. We're on Twitter at Strip the Dip, and that's a handle that we tend to use consistently across social media. So until next time, with great thanks to Martin Wilcox, I've been your co-host, F1 Blag, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.